No, not at all. And as a woodworker, I particularly got into it. So why are we doing this weird thing in the sermon time today? Why are we asking to hear from each other about the saints in our lives? Well, I want to tell you about my grandma, and I think I may have done that before, so my apologies if you get to hear about Grandma Ruth again. She's my maternal grandma. Not by blood. My mom was adopted, as was her brother, by my grandparents on that side. Grandma Ruth was awesome. She would play cards with us. We had this, those Lincoln logs? They had like a little notch. You could build like cabins and things. I had made one at her place once. And then every time I came over, if I took the roof off, there'd be candy in there. We had played cards together. She died in the summer of 2008. So I had just completed my first year in college. She died on July 3rd. She had been battling with cancer for a long time before she died. And it was mainly in her shoulder. She was always a person who could laugh at herself. When we would play cards, her thing, if she won a hand, was to go, woo! And then when she had cancer in her shoulder, it became, woo! And that became kind of the joke around the cards table. When she was diagnosed with cancer, they gave her 6 months to live, and then 2.5 years later, she died. Grandma was kind of the person for me growing up who I identified as my saint. She lived in an apartment that was attached to our house. It was a building, a structure that my grandpa had built, that my mom had grown up in. We worshiped at the same church that my mom was baptized in, that my grandma kind of brought them to. She was kind of the rock in the church for me, and was always the one who encouraged me to do my best and participate in church. One of the saddest parts of my story with Grandma is that Grandma never got to meet Maggie, my wife, which I would really have liked to have happen. Grandma was such a big part of my life, and I think it comes out in my interactions with other people and with my wife, and so it would have been nice for Maggie to have met Grandma Ruth so that she could have known where these things are coming from. And that's why we're doing this today. I want you to know, in part, where the faith of your neighbor in this room is coming from. Now, saints can be a whole bunch of different people, right? They could be people we haven't met before. They could be public figures. One other one that I want to share with you is Nikos Kazantzakis. Raise your hand. Have you ever heard that name before? Nikos Kazantzakis. You may have heard of some of his works. He wrote a book called Zorba the Greek. He wrote a book called The Last Temptation of Christ. He wrote a book, a sequel to the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey. I wanted to share with you a couple of quotes from some of his books. This one is called The Fratricides. It's not a pleasant book, as you might guess from the title. And I'm going to read to you a conversation early on in the book where this monk is having a conversation with the monastery leader about church. It may seem like it's about God, but it's also about church. And what I really like about Nikos Kazantzakis is he challenges the church to be more Christ-like. So, he says, I cannot live in doubt, I'm tormented. My faith in the representatives of God has faltered, and the pain of men who have been wronged fills me with indignation. To whom shall I turn? To Christ, as the church has degraded him, or to those who want to shape a new world, a more just world? I used to go to church, I fasted, I prayed, I called to God, but I found no relief. God never answered me. I realized in time that prayer is not the way, that neither is retreat. Once they were. They brought the earth to heaven, but no more. Now they alienate us from the earth. They do not carry us to heaven. Now, Father Yanaro says, I'm not disillusioned. I have a place to stand, my friend, beside Christ. And I'm not worried about what the bishops are doing. Isn't Christ enough for your reverence? The monk says, don't get upset, Father. No, he's not enough. Not the way that the church has degraded Christ. That is, with lavish clothes and palaces in which he reigns, eating and drinking the nights away with the nobles of this world. I miss that poor, impoverished Christ, the one who is barefoot, hungry, and wronged, the one met by those two humble students traveling in Emmaus, the Christ of Emmaus. That's the one that I searched for and couldn't find in the church. And that was why my heart ached. You understand now, Father. So that's one quote, and then this one is from Report to Greco, which is a sort of fictional autobiographical work. He says, "The world is our monastery. The true monk is he who lives with men and works with God here, in contact with the soil. God does not sit on a throne above in the clouds. God wrestles here on earth alongside us. Solitude is no longer the road for the man who strives, and true prayer, prayer which steers a course straight for the Lord's house and enters, is a noble action. This today is how the true warrior prays." I think Nikos Kazantzakis is my favorite author because he is so raw and honest in what it means for God to have become human and for God to minister in this place where people and things are broken, where God calls us to minister where things and people are broken. Okay, those are my saints for today, Grandma Ruth and Nikos Kazantzakis. If you want any of his works, I have all of them that have been published into English. He's a Greek author. Many of them are not published anymore, and they're hard to find. So if you're interested, let me know. Okay, now we're going to open up the floor. We have a microphone here. If you would like to come forward and share a story or some thoughts about a saint in your life, I invite you to do so. I only ask that you keep it to 60 or 90 seconds, somewhere in there. Okay. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve.
I'd like to talk about someone I've never talked about publicly. He was Mr. Knutson. His first name was either Robert or Richard. I don't really remember, and I doubt very much that he remembers me or my name. I was in 7th grade at the time. Rough time in my life as it is for most kids, going through all kinds of changes. My parents were fighting a lot, and he was my first confirmation teacher. And his teachings to me really helped to develop my faith. That's when I really, I'd been going to church all along since I was a baby, but I didn't really understand much of it. And through his teaching, I fell in love with the church. And I feel like he really influenced my future and my family. And so I just want to remember Mr. Knutson, and I want you to know about Mr. Knutson too.
I would like to remember my father, Bob Olson. He passed away in January of 13 after suffering from Alzheimer's for quite a long time. But my dad in my life was my hero. There were 5 of us kids, and I was right smack in the middle, and he was just this awesome, amazing thing that would walk in the door every night after being out on the farm with his big voice, surrounded his wife, my mom, with love and kisses. He was just this great big figure of a man. I remember going to church at Emmanuel Lutheran in Lincoln, and this is when they wore suits and ties and dresses. I had a summer dress and I had a winter dress, and it was a dress I wore every Sunday. Today we would never wear the same thing 2 Sundays in a row, but we did back then. And there was this, in communion, you would do confession in your seat, and you had the opportunity to kneel and do confession prior to communion. And my dad, who was this great big, he wasn't a big man, he was just he filled the room kind of a man. And my memory is of him kneeling in the pew with us kids sitting there, and that has never left my memory. And those who know my memory, it's kind of weak sometimes, but that image of my dad kneeling and asking for forgiveness prior to going up to communion has never left me. I think of it often when I'm in this church. So that's my dad, and I would like to remember him today. Thanks.
Thank you, Susie.
On All Saints Day for me, kind of tough to pick one person, but I do have 3 people. My great grandma, our great grandma, she's 101, and when I think of her, my entire life, if there are prayer warriors out there or people that are instrumental in me being here, she's one of them. She really taught me how to pray, and that it's okay to pray anytime. There's no right or wrong time to pray. And I think that was really instrumental in my life and coming to be who I am and how much I love prayer and talking with God and Jesus. And then there are 2 other men that I come to know in later part of life that really just taught me fatherhood was more than what I grew up to know or what I grew up with. And Art Lehman and Randy Pearson are instrumental mentors and father figures to me, and just really taught me that loving your kids was a lot more than what I grew up with, and taught me how to be a father. So those are 3 people that I really want to remember today on All Saints Day. I'm going to take another little snippet, because when we talk to our kids about this, and they're a little shy to come up here today, but when we asked our kids if there were any saints in their lives, I would like to share Caleb's brief little story. And he mentioned Chris Edmonds. And Well, we asked him, well, why? Why is Chris so special to you? And he goes, he just makes me laugh. He lets me know that it's okay to be me, and it's okay to love and laugh with Jesus. And I think that's important for us to share. That Caleb has that vision of Chris. So
Thank you. And thanks, Caleb. I think we can take two more. Mark and the next one.
I guess I can think of a few people too that, especially today. I remember my parents. My father passed away in '76, and mom passed in 2012. But they instilled upon me, probably at a really young age, of how important church was. Sundays you were in church. You weren't sick. You weren't sleepy. You could sleep in the car because it was 45 minutes to church. So I guess the second person that I would honor today would be Jack Eads. Jack was a former member here at church. I don't remember the year that he actually passed, but Jack had this way of grabbing your hand and enveloping your whole arm, and he had this big warm embrace, and he instilled in me, I guess probably through the church league softball, how important it was to fellowship not only with your church members, but those church members out there on the softball field that were representing another congregation, how important it was to establish those contacts within the community. And even to this day, I've got people that I played softball with 30, 40 years ago that, they're still really good friends. And a lot of that's because of Jack and what he taught me. The third person, the final one, Pastor talked earlier about one of those behind the scenes people. I guess the third person I'd like to honor this morning is Ken Seiling. I don't know how many of you know Ken. Ken Miller was a great Lion member. I do know that in Mahomet. He was a great friend if you knew him. He'd do anything for you. One little job he had here at church was these candles. These candles are filled with like a paraffin oil. And Ken was the guy behind the scenes that always kept those candles full. So I think it's been almost a year now, I came up to Nancy Rosenberry and I asked her, I said, who's taking care of the candles? Ken's gone. She goes, oh, we're doing that. Are you interested? I said, yeah. That's the way I can honor Ken. I'm that guy behind the scene now. I don't want any recognition for it. Ken taught me that. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. We got one more. If anyone wants. Thanks, Steve.
Most of you grew up with parents at home and everything, but I came from a broken home. But God, if you would look back at your life, no matter what your background, you will see little part-time saints, I call them, because they're planted there for the season, for that particular time in your life. And I can't remember all their names, but God planted classmates in my life that would invite me to their church because my parents didn't go. And God kept bringing me to his church in one way or another. Various churches, I've been to many. But that seed was planted through children my age. Kids, don't forget that you are a saint to someone in your class, that you can speak to them and invite them to your church and let God work through them because you've brought them. But there's a couple more I'd like to. My stepmother, who I resented all my teenage years, one of my stepmothers, the second one, she challenged me in ways that I realize now was God. And her biggest challenge was that I wasn't worth going to college. I would never make it through college anyway, which my stubborn nature said, I'll prove you wrong. And the third saint, who nobody knows, but a dear friend when I was struggling and really searching for God, she was the example of the mercy and grace that God has given to all of us. No matter where I was or what I said, and I said some bad things, She loved me anyway. She accepted me where I was, and she embraced everything that I brought to her. And I cannot believe that that isn't what God wants of us, to embrace one another, no matter where we're at, how we think, how we feel, that we would just love one another and pour out that mercy and grace as she did to me. Her name is Valerie Young. Thank you.
Thank you, Dia. Thank you, everybody who shared. This does not have to conclude our sharing. I invite you to stay after and join us in the fellowship hall and continue to share stories. I hope this has been, it's been revealing for me, pulling back the curtain a little bit to see what makes us tick, what makes our faith tick. In a little bit, we're going to gather for communion, and we will commune with the cloud of witnesses, with all the saints, those that we bring with us and those that have paved the way for us. I invite you to turn open your hymnal as we sing, what's it called, Kat? Blessed Are They, number 7 to 8.